Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari. Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Bhadajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Bhadajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Vishnupad Paramahansa Parudikacharya Ashtotar Shri Srimad, His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Jai. ISKCON DPT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada. Jai. Jaya Vishnupad Paramahansa Parudikacharya Ashtotar Shri Srimad, His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Jai. Nanda Koti Vaishnava Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur. Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Jai. All glories to the Son of the Lord. All glories to the Son of the Lord. All glories to the Son of the Lord. All glories to the Guru and Brahma. Well, does somebody have a book with some pages? That's what I was keeping. There it is. Huh? Okay. There it is. Okay. All right. Sorry about all the confusion. Okay, let me make sure I've got the right page here. There it is. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay. Give me a second here.
On this 12th day of September 2023 in San Diego, we're reading Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are in chapter 2, contents of the Gita summarized, text number 8 on page 71. Na hi prapashyami mamapanudyad yat chokam uchoshanam indriyanam avapya pumav asapatnam ridham rajam suranam apicharipatyam. Okay. Nahi papashyami mamapanudyad yat chokamachoshanam indriyanam avapya bhuma vasapatnam ridham rajang suranam apicharipatyam. Nahi papashyami mamapanudyad yat chokamachoshanam indriyanam avapya bhuma vasapatnam ridham rajang suranam apicharipatyam. Someone want to try it? No. Okay.
I will.
Go ahead.
Nahi prapashami mabapani dad yach chokam.
No, one line at a time.
Okay.
Nahi papashyami mamapanudyad. Go ahead.
Nahi prapashami
No.
mabapani.
Yeah, no. Better just listen, Prabhu. Just listen to the class. I'm sorry.
Oh,
There you go. Nahi papashyami mamapanudyad yat chokamachoshanam indriyanam
avapya bhumav asapatnam
ridham
rajam suranam
apicharipatyam. Word by words. Na, do not, he, certainly, papashyami, I see, mama, my, apanudyat, can drive away, yat, that which, shokam, lamentation, uchoshanam, drying up, indriyanam, of the senses, avapya, achieving, bhumau, on the earth, asapatnam, without rival, ridham, prosperous, rajam, kingdom, suranam, of the demigods, api, even, cha, also, Adipatyam. Haribol. Welcome, Antonella. Okay, we're on page 72, beginning the translation. Translation, Arjuna said to Krishna, I can find no means to drive away this grief, which is drying up my senses. I will not be able to dispel it, even if I win a prosperous, unrivaled kingdom on earth, with sovereignty like that of the demigods in heaven. Purport. Although Arjuna was putting forward so many arguments based on knowledge of the principles of religion and moral codes, it appears that he was unable to solve his real problem without the help of the spiritual master, Lord Sri Krishna. He could understand that his so-called knowledge was useless in driving away his problems, which were drying up his whole existence, and it was impossible for him to solve such perplexities without the help of a spiritual master like Lord Krishna. Academic knowledge, scholarship, high position, etc. are all useless in solving the problems of life. Help can be given only by a spiritual master like Krishna. Therefore, the conclusion is that a spiritual master who is 100% Krishna conscious is the bona fide spiritual master, for he can solve the problems of life. Lord Chaitanya said that one who is a master in the science of Krishna consciousness, regardless of his social position, is the real spiritual master. Kiba vipra kiba nyasi shudra kene noi, Jai Krishna tattva veta se guru hoy. It does not matter, quote, it does not matter whether a person is a vipra, learned scholar in Vedic wisdom, or is born in a lower family, or is in the renounced order of life. If he is a master in the science of Krishna, he is the perfect and bona fide spiritual master. Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya 8, 128. So without being a master in the science of Krishna consciousness, no one is a bona fide spiritual master. It is also said in the Vedic literature, Shatkam nipano vipro mantratanta visharadaha avaishnavo guru nasyad vaishnava swapacho guruhu. A scholarly Brahmin, expert in all subjects of Vedic knowledge, is unfit to become a spiritual master without being a Vaishnav or expert in the science of Krishna consciousness. But a person born in a family of a lower caste can become a spiritual master if he is a Vaishnav or Krishna conscious. Padma Puran. Prabhu, why don't you grab a book? Yeah, just take a book and then you go back, sit down in your seat. And we're on page 73. 73. Okay. The problems of material existence, birth, old age, disease, and death, cannot be counteracted by accumulation of wealth and economic development. In many parts of the world, there are states which are replete with all facilities of life, which are full of wealth and economically developed. Yet the problems of material existence are still present. They are seeking peace in different ways, but they can achieve real happiness only if they consult Krishna, or the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, which constitute the science of Krishna. Through the bona fide representative of Krishna, the man in Krishna consciousness. If economic development and material comforts could drive away one's lamentations for family, social, national, or international inebrieties, then Arjuna would not have said that even an unrivaled kingdom on earth or supremacy like that of the demigods in the heavenly planets would be unable to drive away his lamentations. He sought, therefore, refuge in Krishna consciousness, and that is the right path for peace and harmony. Economic development or supremacy over the world can be finished at any moment by the cataclysms of material nature. Even elevation into a higher planetary situation, as men are now seeking on the moon planet, can also be finished at one stroke. The Bhagavad Gita confirms this. Chine punye machalokam vishanti. When the results of pious activities are finished, one falls down again from the peak of happiness to the lowest status of life. Many politicians of the world have fallen down in that way. Such downfalls only constitute more causes for lamentation. Therefore, if we want to curb lamentation for good, then we have to take shelter of Krishna, as Arjuna is seeking to do. So Arjuna asked Krishna to solve his problems definitely, and that is the way of Krishna consciousness. Om Jnana Timarandasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmidatam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. So this is a kind of a, what you say, existential crisis for Arjuna. Arjuna was a lifelong friend and devotee of Krishna, and he and his brothers were seen as righteousness personified. They were the sons of Pandu. They had the guidance of Bhishma Dev in their youth when their father died untimely, and they were devotees of Krishna from birth. But the intrigue in the Mahabharata is such that they're the rightful inheritors of the kingdom. Their father was the king, Pandu, and he died. But they were just children, so they weren't eligible to take it over then. So it was put in the hands of Dhritarashtra, who was the eldest son, but he was blind, so he was unable to really function properly as a king. So there was all this confusion, and the result was that Dhritarashtra's sons said, well, why can't we get the kingdom? Because it rightly belongs to Dhritarashtra. So there was this question of what is real dharma. This is the whole thing. And in the previous verse, text number 7, a few verses back, Arjuna has this critical verse, Karpanya dosho pahata svabhava prichami tvam dharma samudacheta. Dharma samudacheta means that I'm bewildered about what is my actual duty. And therefore, this miserly weakness has stolen away my real svabhava, my real nature as a Kshatriya is not manifesting anymore. I'm paralyzed because if I fight, there's my beloved grandfather figure, Bhishma Dev, and Dronacharya, my teacher, and so many other friends and relatives, right on the other side. Can you imagine that? I mean, he had been through so many battles and been victorious, but here, this is bewildering him. But right on the chariot, he knows that Krishna wants him to fight, that this is part of Krishna's plan, to reinstitute Dharma on the earth and have a Dharma personified Yudhishthira, King Yudhishthira, leading the world for the benefit of the people in general. So this is his dilemma. His heart, his gut was telling me, no, I don't want to kill them. If I'm victorious, then the spoils will be soaked with their blood, will be contaminated with their blood. How can I enjoy that, Better I go off to the forest and just beg. So that would be, and Krishna would say, no, if you do that, they'll just think you're a coward, So he's in this situation. And now the present verse that we just read, he says, I find no means to drive away this grief which is drying up my senses. I won't be able to dispel it even if I win a prosperous, unrivaled kingdom on earth with sovereignty like that of the Demons in heaven. So there's no material solution to his problem. It's not a question of winning the kingdom and then solving the problem. That itself would just further the problem. So the answer, as Prabhupada makes very clear, is to seek a spiritual solution and to get that instruction from a bona fide spiritual master. Now, no one can be more bona fide than Krishna himself. In fact, anyone who's a present-day spiritual master must be a representative of Krishna, genuine representative. I like to share this verse. There's so many wonderful verses in the Shastra that provide, days actually of contemplation and instruction. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, the father of our grand spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who was the exalted son of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who really revived Gaudiya Vaishnavism in India. It had become corrupted by sahajiyas. Sahajiya means those who take it very easily. They immediately want to jump to the rasa dance and enact the rasa dance and forget about rules and regulations. You can see how dangerous that is. So he revived genuine Gaudiya Vaishnavism in India. And his son, of course, was so much inspired by him and by his own guru that he started the Gaudiya Mat, which Srila Prabhupada was part of, which was a revival of Gaudiya Vaishnavism in India, and he had so many mats. Mat means a temple with an ashram. So this actually would be a mat, And he gave Srila Prabhupada the instruction when he first met him. Prabhupada was just, just started his business. He was a young man. He was just married. I think he had one child. But he had been raised as a Vaishnava, and so he went to see Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and he greeted him, of course, offered his obeisance. Even before he got settled, he said, he was with a friend, he said, "Oh, you're intelligent young man, why don't you preach genuine Vaishnavism all over the world in English?" Prabhupada was shocked. He had hardly even met him, Anyway, he became his spiritual master, or Prabhupada became his disciple. And we know the history. Eventually, he came to America in his old age and was able to establish his whole society and write all these books. And why did he have the potency? Precisely because he was a genuine representative of Krishna. He was simply, as he said several times, he's simply repeating Krishna's words. And when he quotes here, Kiba Vipra Kiba Nyasi, he's quoting Krishna in the form of Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya is also Krishna. This verse that we had in the purport, this was spoken to Ramananda Roy. Ramananda Roy was not a sannyasi. He was a manager, a governor in one of the provinces of India, in South India. But he was a very, very advanced, intimate disciple. Member inner core of Krishna's servants, in his inner spiritual life. And he was expert in all the intricacies of Radha Krishna worship and things like that. So Lord Chaitanya specifically sought him out, and he took the role of a student. Lord Chaitanya did, of this Ramananda Roy. Ramananda Roy was hesitant because he knew that Lord Chaitanya was actually God, He said, how can I take the role of a guru So Lord Chaitanya spoke this verse. He says, you don't have to worry whether you're a Vipra, a Brahmin, or a sannyasi, or even a Shudra. Why not a Shudra? If you know Krishna Tattva, if you know, then you can be a guru. If you actually understand it and have realized it. And Ramananda Roy did that. And their conversation in chapter 8 of the Madhya Lila Chaitanya Charitamrita is a very essential insight into the most advanced parts of Krishna's bhakti shastra and understanding and truth. So, on the other hand, the corresponding with Shat Karma Nibbana Vipra, one may be a very learned Brahmin in all the techniques of performing sacrifice and these things. But if you're not a Vaishnava, you can't be a guru. You have to be a representative of Krishna, which means a Vaishnava, someone who's dedicated to serving Krishna. So, our real problems cannot be solved by any material means because we're by nature spiritual beings. This is what this chapter is all about. Explaining to Arjuna your spirit, not matter, and your spiritual duties you're unaware of right now. And he'll chastise him. He'll say, you're lamenting what's not worthy of grief, namely the physical body. What really counts is the spirit, is the soul, which is eternal. And then he'll go on, and that's the foundation of all of our understanding of Krishna consciousness. So, any discussion on this verse? Arjuna continues his lament. There's no solution to my problems by getting a kingdom, winning it. That's not there must be some other way. So eventually he'll just say, I'm not going to fight. And then Krishna starts speaking in text 11, and he chastises him, as a guru can do, trying to, All right, let's go on. Sanjaya Vacha Eva Muktva Rishikesham Gurakesha Parantapa Nayotsya iti Govindam Uktva Tushnim Babuvaha. Sanjay said. So Sanjay is back in Hastinapur, but by his spiritual vision, he's getting the transmission like a television right there live, what they're saying and what's going on on the battlefield. So Sanjay said, he's speaking to Dhritarashtra. Having spoken thus, Arjuna, chastiser of enemies, told Krishna, Govinda, I shall not fight, and fell silent. Purport. Dhritarashtra must have been very glad to understand that Arjuna was not going to fight and was instead leaving the battlefield for the begging profession. But Sanjay disappointed him again in relating that Arjuna was competent to kill his enemies, parantapa, that's in the verse. Although Arjuna was, for the time being, overwhelmed with false grief due to family affection, he surrendered unto Krishna, the supreme spiritual master, as a disciple. This indicated that he would soon be free from the false lamentation resulting from family affection and would be enlightened with perfect knowledge of self-realization or Krishna consciousness and would then surely fight. Thus, Dhritarashtra's joy would be frustrated since Arjuna would be enlightened by Krishna and would fight to the end. So this is a famous line, Govinda, I shall not fight. And then at the end, he says, Kadashe vachanang tava, I will do as you say. By your mercy, my ignorance has been dispelled. So that's the whole purpose of the Gita. Tamovacha Rishikesha Prahasan iva bharata Senayor ubihor madhye Vishidantamidam vachaha. O descendant of Bharat, at that time, Krishna, smiling on the chariot between the two armies, spoke the following words to the grief-stricken Arjuna. Purport. The talk was going on between intimate friends, namely Rishikesh and the Gudikesh, the Rishikesh and the Gudikesh, As friends, both of them were on the same level, but one of them voluntarily became a student of the other. Krishna was smiling because a friend had chosen to become a disciple. As Lord of all, he is always in the superior position as the master of everyone. And yet the Lord agrees to be a friend, a son, or a lover for a devotee who wants him in such a role. But when he was accepted as the master, he at once assumed the role and talked with the disciple like the master, with gravity, as it is required. It appears that the talk between the master and the disciple was openly exchanged in the presence of both armies, so that all were benefited. So the talks of the Bhagavad Gita are not for any particular person, society, or community, but they are for all, and friends or enemies are equally entitled to hear them. So Srila Prabhupada, he embraced that truth when he came to America and left India to preach. I mean, none of his godbrothers could even imagine that. I mean, they first tried to go to India. That was to England. That was some years earlier. Bhaktisiddhanta had funded and sent them to UK, because that was the world leader at that time of nations in the early 20th century. But they couldn't do anything. They approached some of the lords, and they tried to get the royalty, and they met a few people. They maybe made a few disciples, but they had to come back. They couldn't do anything. But Prabhupada, he went to the people on the street. He went to the hippies. He was looking for people who were genuinely willing to take up the process. Not the lords and ladies, who were stuck in their ways, no. And it was a genius move, because he got some very sincere, surrendered souls who were ready to give their lives. And they were intelligent. I mean, Satsarup Maharaj had a job with the local government there as a welfare worker. And eventually Prabhupada, he had people who were going to be doctors, and they were students in the university, but they became attracted and they joined. These are very competent people. So it was, and even in Prabhupada's 12 years, that's how long he was preaching, in the West and around the world. He was able to plant the seeds all over the world. There were temples in Russia even, and of course in India, and throughout Europe, even in Africa, the Far East. It was amazing what he was able to do because of the purity and the potency and the empowerment of Krishna. That's why they have this word Shaktyavesh, Shaktyavesha avatar. Shakti means energy, Avesh means invested. So Krishna will invest us with energy if we're sincere servants, and we can do wonderful, wonderful things. Okay. All right, so Krishna begins to speak. So the Bhagavad Gita instruction actually begins from this verse. Text 11. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Ashochanam Vashochastvam Pragyavadangsha Bhashase Gatasuna Gatasumscha Nanushochanti Panditaha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "While speaking learned words, you are mourning for what is not worthy of grief. Those who are wise lament neither for the living nor for the dead." Purport. The Lord at once took the position of the teacher and chastised the student, calling him indirectly a fool. The Lord said, quote, "You are talking like a learned man, but you do not know that one who is learned, one who knows what is body and what is soul, does not lament for any stage of the body, neither in the living nor in the dead condition." As explained in later chapters, it will be clear that knowledge means to know matter and spirit and the controller of both. This is a famous phrase. You can memorize it. What is real knowledge? Matter and spirit and the controller of both. Arjuna argued that religious principles should be given more importance than politics or sociology. But he did not know that knowledge of matter, soul, and the Supreme is even more important than religious formularies. And because he was lacking in that knowledge, he should not have posed himself as a very learned man. As he did not happen to be a very learned man, he was consequently lamenting for something which was unworthy of lamentation. The body is born and is destined to be vanquished today or tomorrow. Therefore, the body is not as important as the soul. One who knows this is actually learned, and for him there is no cause for lamentation, regardless of the condition of the material body. So you can just contemplate that for a minute, because what are people lamenting about? You know, what is it that causes us to be sad when our material condition, we get sick, we lose some money, we don't get the job, or whatever, some relationship doesn't work out? It's all based on the body, you know. But actually, we're not the body. All of this concern and this worry and this obsession with our material condition ultimately becomes meaningless when you leave the body. And that can happen at any time. We never die. This is like a revolution, but no one dies. I have this little ditty that I made up. Every body dies. Who can deny it? Every body dies. Nobody dies. Wake up, and open your eyes. You're not that body, you're a pure spirit soul. Chant the holy name and attain life's goal. Summarizes Hare Krishna movement. Right. But it's profound. It's actually based on a verse in the Bhagavad Gita. There's a verse coming up. It's Antabanta hime deha nitya sokta sharirina. All these bodies, Krishna's there with the millions of soldiers, they're all listening, you know. They all antabanta, they come to an end. They eventually die. Nitya sokta sharirina, but the dweller within the body, the soul, is eternal. You know, this is the basic lesson he's going to teach now for the next 20 verses. There's a 20-verse lesson on the soul. And that's a foundational for further understanding of our spiritual life. Okay, so let's go on. Text 12. Natvevaham jatunasam natvam neme janadipaha nachaiva nabhavishyama sarve vayamatakparam. Now suddenly we get a very long purport here, because Prabhupada is going to be fighting against the Maya bodies in this. You'll see. Purport. In the Vedas, in the Katha Upanishad, as well as in the Shvetashvata Upanishad, it is said that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the maintainer of innumerable living entities in terms of their different situations according to individual work and reaction of work. That Supreme Personality of Godhead is also, by his plenary portions, alive in the heart of every living entity. Only saintly persons who can see within and without the same Supreme Lord can actually attain to perfect and eternal peace. And here's the verse that Prabhupada just translated. Nityo nityanam chaitanas chaitananam eko bahunam yovadadati kaman tamatmastam yeyanu pashyanti dhiras tesham shanti shaswati netaresham. Katha Upanishad 2.2.13. Okay. Let me just translate this verse. So Nityo Nityanam means of the many, Chaitana Chaitana, of the many eternal conscious beings, there's one eternal conscious being who is Eko, that one, Bahunam Yovadadati Kaman, who is supplying the necessities for everyone else. That's Krishna, that's God, right? Then Tamatmastam Ye Anupashyanti Dhiras, one who is Dhira. Dhira is one who's self-controlled, who is a yogi. Then he can see. Anupashyanti dhiras. Tesham shanti shasvati netaresham. And thus becomes fully peaceful in his life. No other person can do that. If you can't understand this God and fill your life with that consciousness, you cannot have any peace. Okay. This Katha Upanishad 2.2.13. The same Vedic truth given to Arjuna is given to all persons in the world who pose themselves as very learned, but factually have but a poor fund of knowledge. The Lord says clearly that he himself, Arjuna, and all the kings who are assembled on the battlefield, all the warriors, are eternally individual beings. And the Lord is eternally the maintainer of the individual living entities, both in their conditioned and in their liberated situations. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the supreme individual person, and Arjuna, the Lord's eternal associate, and all the kings assembled there are individual eternal persons. It is not that they did not exist as individuals in the past, and it is not that they will not remain eternal persons. Their individuality existed in the past, and their individuality will continue in the future without interruption. Therefore, there is no cause for lamentation for anyone. The Mayavadi theory that after liberation, the individual soul, separated by the covering of Maya or illusion, will merge into the impersonal Brahman and lose its individual existence is not supported herein by Lord Krishna, the Supreme Authority. Nor is the theory that we only think of individuality in the conditioned state supported herein. Krishna clearly says herein that in the future also the individuality of the Lord and others, as it is confirmed in the Upanishads, will continue eternally. This statement of Krishna's is authoritative because Krishna cannot be subject to illusion. If individuality were not a fact, then Krishna would not have stressed it so much, even for the future. The Mayavadi may argue that the individuality spoken of by Krishna is not spiritual, but material. Even accepting the argument that the individuality is material, then how can one distinguish Krishna's individuality? Krishna affirms his individuality in the past and confirms his individuality in the future also. He has confirmed his individuality in many ways, and impersonal Brahman has been declared to be subordinate to him. Krishna has maintained spiritual individuality all along. If he is accepted as an ordinary conditioned soul in individual consciousness, then his Bhagavad Gita has no value as authoritative scripture. A common man with all the 4 defects of human frailty is unable to teach that which is worth hearing. The Gita is above such literature. No mundane book compares with the Bhagavad Gita. When one accepts Krishna as an ordinary man, the Gita loses all importance. The Mayavadi argues that the plurality mentioned in this verse is conventional and that it refers to the body. But previous to this verse, such a bodily conception is already condemned. After condemning the bodily conception of the living entities, how was it possible for Krishna to place a conventional proposition on the body again? Therefore, individuality is maintained on spiritual grounds and is thus confirmed by great acharyas like Sri Ramanuja and others. It is clearly mentioned in many places in the Gita that this spiritual individuality is understood by those who are devotees of the Lord. Those who are envious of Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead have no bona fide access to this great literature. The non-devotee's approach to the teachings of the Gita is something like that of a bee licking on a bottle of honey. One cannot have a taste of honey unless one opens the bottle. Similarly, the mysticism of the Bhagavad Gita can be understood only by devotees, and no one else can taste it, as it is stated in the 4th chapter of the book. Nor can the Gita be touched by persons who envy the very existence of the Lord. Therefore, the Mayavadi explanation of the Gita is a most misleading presentation of the whole truth. Lord Chaitanya has forbidden us to read commentations made by the Mayavadis and warns that one who takes to such an understanding of the Mayavadi philosophy loses all power to understand the real mystery of the Gita. If individuality refers to the empirical universe, then there is no need of teaching by the Lord. The plurality of the individual soul and the Lord is an eternal fact, and it is confirmed by the Vedas as above mentioned. So, very important instruction there. I remember my near-death experience with the Mayavadis. I was a member of the Ramakrishna mission for a while. I hadn't even met the devotees. This is in New York back in '72, I think it was. And it's very interesting because we used to sing a song there. I don't remember the song exactly, but it was along the lines of, I'm not a Brahmin, I'm not a Sudra, I'm not this, I'm that, I'm a spirit soul. And those who know something about Lord Chaitanya's teachings, he wrote a verse to has the same introductory idea. Because these bodies that we're in, these identities we have, it's just temporary. It's like wearing a coat. Krishna uses that analogy later in the 2nd chapter. Vasangsi jirnani yata vihaya granati nirani naro parani tatashadiyani vihaya jirnani angyani sangyati navani dehi. Just as one will take off an old piece of garment and throw it away, similarly, each of us takes off our old body when it's useless and discard it and get another one. You see? But it's a traumatic experience because we're so attached to it and identified with it. And then when we get the next body, if it's human, we'll forget all about the previous body, right? And we'll be trained, whatever family and we start all over again. So back in 72, I was attracted, and I started going there, and we sang this song. And then, by great good fortune, I was saved from that entanglement, and I joined the Hare Krishna movement. And at sometime later, I discovered a verse by Lord Chaitanya. And I think this verse was inspired by that song of Shankaracharya, because that was very prominent in India at the time. So here's Lord Chaitanya's verse. He says, Naham, it's a nice verse, Naham vipro nachanadapatir napi vaishyo nashudro. Naham varni nachagrihapatir novanastoyatirva. Kintu proja nikalapadamanan purnam vitabde gopi bhatu padakamalayo dasa dasanudasa. That last phrase is very, famous. So what is he saying there? He says, I am not a Brahmin, I am not a Kshatriya, I am not a Vaishya or a Shudra. These are the 4 different varnas, social stations in the varnashram. And then the spiritual station, I'm not a brahmachari, I'm not a grihastha, I'm not a vanaprastha or a sannyasi. Then what are you? I am simply the servant of the servant of the servant of Gopi. Yes, I am simply a servant of the lotus feet of Krishna, the master of the gopis, and Nikalapadamanan, who is an ocean of nectar, and love. So that's how Lord Chaitanya is identifying himself, and we are also meant to be like that. There's a verse in the Mukundamala Stotra which precedes Lord Chaitanya. That's from the early, 700 AD, like that. And he chants this verse, Mad janmanak palamidam madukaita bari, Mat prataniya madanugraha esha eva, Trad britya padicharika britya sibritya itimam smadalokanata. Britya is another word for das, for servant. So he says, my dear Lord, please make my life successful, this birth. Mat janmanak palamidam. Madhukaita by the enemy of Madhu and Kaitaba demons. These are demons Krishna killed. Mad pratani madanugra, please show me the mercy, and just please think of me this way, as I'm the servant of 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 the servant. That's literally how many servants. So it means you take a humble position and render service to those who are sincere servants of Krishna. And so that means of course, Srila Prabhupada and its sincere followers. And help them, and to become to lower the temperature of the false ego, and just realize that our real identity is to be a servant of Krishna. This is another famous verse that Lord Chaitanya spoke. Sanatana Goswami was one of Lord Chaitanya, his chief's disciple. He and his brother Rupa Goswami, and they were both very highly placed in the government of Bengal. One was the prime minister, and the other was the finance minister. You can see how they were trusted, completely trustworthy, right? They were very great scholars. They knew Sanskrit and other languages, and they were Vaishnavas. But they were coerced to be part of the government because the king could understand how valuable it would be to be able to rule over the others if he had them in the government. So he said, if you don't join my government and help me rule, then I'll persecute the Brahmins and Vaishnavas. Okay. So anyway, when Lord Chaitanya visited their capital city, Ramkeli, and they saw him, they immediately recognized that this is Krishna in the form of Lord Chaitanya. So they offered their obeisances and spoke this key verse. Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Padayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namani Gaudatuja Namaha. We offer our obeisances unto the most munificent avatar of Krishna. Mahavana, Krishna Prema, who is freely giving the most valuable thing in existence. Krishna Prema, love for Krishna, distributing it freely. Krishna, and is Krishna himself. You are Krishna himself, taking the role of Krishna Chaitanya. Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne, Gaudataje Namaha, with the golden complexion. A very important verse. So then, so Lord Chaitanya gave him some instructions. They had to get out of their commitments, and they were deeply enmeshed in the government. So Rupa Goswami was able to resign and cash out. He had a whole boatload of gold Can you imagine how much money? And but he was taking sannyas to become so he gave half of it to the service of the Vaishnavas and the Brahmins. A quarter of it he gave to his family because probably said they expect something. That'll cause a lot of trouble, you know. And then a quarter of it he saved for emergency. What was the emergency? Sanatana Goswami was so valuable to the king that he wouldn't let him resign. And instead he arrested him and put him in jail. So Rupa Goswami, he wanted to go to Vrindavan, so he put the money, imagine how many, 10,000 pieces of gold, in the care of, and it says, a trustworthy grocer. You can imagine the caliber of people you could trust a grocer. So he trusted, and so he then made the money available to Sanatana Goswami, even though he was in jail, So Sanatana Goswami used it to bribe the jailkeeper. The king was out fighting someone, and so he was able to get out, and then he had to make his way to Vrindavan. So he was going to the forest this way and that way, and finally he came to Benares, where Lord Chaitanya was staying, in the city of Benares. And there Lord Chaitanya taught him for 2 months straight. This was the longest period that he taught. Rupa Goswami, he taught for 10 days. So he taught him, and then, so how did Sanatana Goswami, how did the teachings begin? So Sanatana Goswami surrenders to him, and he says, Kayami Kenayame Jaritapatrai, that who am I? I'm a supposedly learned scholar, and he did Sanskrit and Persian, but I don't even know who I am. Who am I, and why am I suffering? So Lord Chaitanya answered the first question, and it's an answer that we should know. Jivara Swarupoi. Jiva is the living entity, and the Swarup is your real identity, your actual role, who we are. Krishnera Nitya Das. Yes, and he's an eternal servant of Krishna, every one of us. And it goes on, Krishnera Tatasta Shakti Beda Bed Prakash. Krishnera Tatasta Shakti means each of us is part of Krishna's energy, and we're known as the Tatasta, meaning we're on the border, we're marginal. What does that mean? It means that we're very minute, and although our constitutional position is to be servants of Krishna, we have the option and the power of turning from that real nature and becoming absorbed in the material energy. And that's what we all did, those of us who were here. We were in the spiritual world, and we were curious, so we wanted to rebel, one reason or another, turned away from Krishna, got absorbed in the material energy, and then forgot all about Krishna. You see? But that's still our eternal nature. So we're simultaneously, everything in existence is simultaneously one with and different from Krishna. Because everything that exists, including us, are part of Krishna's energy. We're part of the spiritual energy, and we're enmeshed in the material energy. And that's our dilemma. We want to get back to the pure spiritual energy in the spiritual world. And that is done by cultivating this process of bhakti yoga. So then Lord Chaitanya continues to teach Sanatana Goswami. This is chapters, I think, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 of the Madhya Lila in Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's completely open. Anyone can just get on the internet, dial in Vedabase-IO, and then you'll have all the books available. You click on Chaitanya Charitamrita, and anyone can read it. Or, So that's the foundation of this movement. The teachings there and in the Bhagavad Gita and elsewhere. All right, it's getting a little late. Let's see. So we did 12, right? All right. Let's read 13. Maybe we'll begin there tomorrow too, because it's such an important verse. Dehinosmin yata dehe kaumaram yauvanam jara tata dehantara praptir dhiras tatra namuhyati. As the embodied soul continuously passes in this body, from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. Purport. Since every living entity is an individual soul, each is changing his body at every moment, manifesting sometimes as a child, sometimes as a youth, and sometimes as an old man. Yet the same spirit soul is there and does not undergo any change. This individual soul finally changes the body at death and transmigrates to another body. And since it is sure to have another body in the next birth, either material or spiritual, there was no cause for lamentation by Arjuna on account of death, neither for Bhishma nor for Drona, for whom he was so much concerned. Rather, he should rejoice for their changing bodies from old to new ones, thereby rejuvenating their energy. Such changes of body account for varieties of enjoyment or suffering, according to one's work in life. So Bhishma and Drona, being noble souls, were surely going to have spiritual bodies in the next life, or at least life in heavenly bodies for superior enjoyment of material existence. So in either case, there was no cause of lamentation. Any man who has perfect knowledge of the constitution of the individual soul, the supersoul, and nature, both material and spiritual, is called a dhira, or a most sober man. Such a man is never deluded by the change of bodies. The Mayavadi theory of oneness of the spirit soul cannot be entertained, on the ground that the spirit soul cannot be cut into pieces as a fragmental portion. Such cutting into different individual souls would make the Supreme cleavable or changeable against the principle of the Supreme Souls being unchangeable. As confirmed in the Gītā, the fragmental portions of the Supreme exist eternally, sanatan, and are called chara. That is, they have a tendency to fall down into material nature. These fragmental portions are eternally so, and even after liberation, the individual soul remains the same, fragmental. But once liberated, he lives an eternal life in bliss and knowledge with the personality of Godhead. The theory of reflection can be applied to the Supersoul, who is present in each and every individual body and is known as the Paramatma. He is different from the individual living entity. When the sky is reflected in water, the reflections represent both the sun and the moon and the stars also. The stars can be compared to the living entities, and the sun or the moon to the Supreme Lord. The individual fragmental spirit soul is represented by Arjuna, and the Supreme Soul is the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. They are not on the same level, as it will be apparent in the beginning of the 4th chapter. If Arjuna is on the same level with Krishna, and Krishna is not superior to Arjuna, then their relationship of instructor and instructed becomes meaningless. If both of them are deluded by the illusory energy, Maya, then there is no need for one being the instructor and the other the instructed. Such instruction would be useless because in the clutches of Maya no one can be an authoritative instructor. Under the circumstances, it is admitted that Lord Krishna is the Supreme Lord, superior in position to the living entity Arjuna, who is a forgetful soul deluded by Maya. Now one may ask, well, how is he deluded by Maya? I thought he was an eternal friend of Krishna, And the answer is that he was put into this delusion by Krishna so that he could speak the Bhagavad Gita for the benefit of all of us. And at the end, he'll say, oh, my delusion is now gone by your mercy, and I will fight. So it's a temporary situation. And it's temporary for us too, but it's up to us how quick we want to end this delusion, and that requires surrender and chanting Hare Krishna seriously. Okay, so it's a little late. I have time only for a very short poem. Okay. Maduresha Madhuri Mayamadava Munadi Matallika Mugdha Mama Madana Mohana Madaya Manaso Maha Maha Moham. O Master of Mathura, lovely Lord of Goddess Shri, who play such maddening melodies upon your Murali. O Cupid's charmer, please redeem a life till now misspent by joyfully destroying my extreme bewilderment. Hare Krishna. If you want my poetry, just write to Dravida108@gmail, and I'll send you my PDF with all my poems in it. Hare Krishna. So hopefully we can meet again tomorrow, same time, and we'll continue these important teachings of Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. All right. And now we will prepare for the kirtan. And I will be playing the drum.